Good morning. I'm Angel, and I'm glad you've decided to join us. Today's webinar is 3 Steps to Managing Construction Delay Disputes. I hope you're in the right webinar today. We think you'll enjoy it. Our guest today is John Jackson. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Angel.
We have a short time together today, so I wanted to get started. Let me cover a couple of housekeeping issues up front. On your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a dialog box for asking questions. Please feel free to enter questions as you think of them. Your questions will go in a queue, and we'll stop a time or two to address as many questions as we can. Please use the question box instead of the hand-raising tool. With our attendance level today, the queue will work best. John Jackson, our guest today, began his construction career as a software developer in the 80s, developing construction scheduling software. Over his 25-year career in the construction industry, his expertise has developed as a scheduling and delay dispute expert. He has also consulted with organizations developing procedures and training programs in project management, and we are glad to introduce him to you.
Well, thank you, Angel. And I want to also say welcome to everyone. I would like to start this morning with, I'd like to know a little bit about our audience. If you are here today and if you have access to the control panel, I know some of you are in groups in a conference area, so if you could have one person that has access, I want to ask some questions. First, what is your role in the construction industry? If you could just answer, we will kind of get an idea of who all is in the audience today. I'll give you just another few more seconds. And we'll close that poll. And I'll just kind of let you see. We have a pretty good group of owners today. We have some consultants in the audience, a few contractors, and a few developers. Let's ask another one. I want to kind of get an idea of the experience base in our audience. And the second poll question is, how long have you been in the construction industry? Looks like we've got a pretty good experience base in our audience today. I'm going to close that poll and give you an idea of the results there. Quite a bit of experience. And let me ask you one more question. And this is, how many webinars have you attended this year? How many webinars have you attended this year? And the majority of you have been in a few webinars. Some of you, this is your first. So we want to welcome you to this webinar. And our training, personally, the training that I've been doing over the years, I've really seen the increase in webinar usage, using the internet. And it's just amazing how it is changing the way construction projects are managed. So that's good. Well, we're going to jump into it real quick. We want to start off with scheduling and delay analysis, talk about it briefly. I've been doing this, as Angel mentioned, I've been doing this for 25 years, going on 25 years, and I have seen a dramatic change in the way schedules and scheduling specifications and delay analysis and dispute resolution has changed over the years. And there's been some big factors. One is the economic factor. We've had a large percentage of companies and organizations have begun to realize how valuable the scheduling tool is for calculating and managing a project completion time. Another big factor has been technology, the ability to put the computer schedule on a laptop or now on the internet and be able to communicate and plan projects across even large enterprises and monitor those projects. And then another one is the efficiency, the ability to really get down to detail level, managing crews, managing cash flow. And so those are some big requirements. But the biggest issue has been the legal application, which is why a lot of us are in here today when we're talking about dispute resolution. That has been probably the biggest driving factor in why scheduling and schedule requirements have changed over the years. When I first began doing it as a scheduler, rarely did anyone even ask me how the schedule looked. I was doing it primarily just to get a schedule submitted to an owner just so a contractor could get paid. But over the years, as dispute resolution became a bigger factor and you had more and more people getting in disputes, then you had scheduling requirements began to really increase. In fact, scheduling specifications have really become a significant part of contract specifications. So there's bad news in the sense that a lot of times we get so far in a hole that we just can't get out, and there's no other option but to get into dispute resolution, some kind of formal dispute resolution. And that's the bad news. You can get so deep in a hole it's kind of hard to dig yourself out other than go into some type of third-party resolution process. However, there is good news. The good news is that a lot of these delays, if you look at our previous webinar that we did last month, a lot of these delays can be avoided by using good scheduling practices where you can avoid these types of disputes. So let's get started on if you can't get it resolved and you do have to go to some kind of dispute resolution process. The first point that I want to bring out this morning is the importance of analyzing the risk. The first thing any organization should do if they say, oh, we've got a claim, we've got a big problem here on this job and we're going to file a claim, we are going to send in these letters and we think we have $1 million claim. The first thing that I always get with my clients and say right off the bat is let's look at the risk. I know you think you have a $1 million claim, but let's really see what the value of that claim really is. And one of the first things that we look at is how much is it worth and what are we going to go through to collect it. So here's some big issues. There's extra work. This extra work may be in the form of change order work. It could be just work that didn't get paid, quantity issues, whatever. That may be outstanding. So one of the first things you want to do when you sit down to do a risk analysis is you look at your extra work and whether it's a time issue or a money issue, it's the same factor, whether it's a delay or a cost issue. You look at, how much extra work do we have, and let's put how much we think we can collect, which is going to have to do with how much we have, or how much documentation we have, all of those kind of things. Another factor is loss of productivity. Now that loss of productivity is a significant part of most delay claims, a pretty good chunk of them. And as we'll talk about in a little bit, loss of productivity claims are some of the hardest claims to resolve. They're the hardest to substantiate and they're the hardest to just support in any kind of dispute resolution process. So you look at, okay, how much of our claim is a loss of productivity claim, and let's say we might be able to get 50% of that if on a good day. And then the other issue, how much of our delay claim deals with the actual delays themselves, and what kind of delays they are, and how are we going to resolve those delays. So I'm going to give you an example. If you have, if you're going to try to evaluate a delay claim, one of the first issues and one of the hottest topics in the dispute resolution process, in the delay dispute resolution process, is the early completion claim. And we're going to just suppose that a contractor assumed that he could have finished 30 days early, but there was a 60-day delay, and there was 30 days that they would have finished early, but they ended up actually finishing 30 days late, right? So you have this delay, and it kind of looks like that. So you have 30 days before the contract completion date that you're claiming you were delayed as a contractor, and then 30 days after the after the contract completion date. This always presents a good challenge, because if you're trying to collect on a delay that happened before the contract milestone, it's going to be a lot more difficult to collect that portion than it is to collect dates that push the project past the contract milestone. And same thing if you're an owner and you have an early completion delay claim and it's been presented to you, and you're trying to figure out how to resolve this thing, you should break these things out in your review process and say, okay, out of these 60 days that the contractor's asking for, we have a 30-30 split between early completion and regular completion. On the early completion, here are some issues that a contractor would have to show. The contractor, if he's going to get those 30 days, the contractor will have to show that he intended to complete the project early. In most cases, that means at some point he had to show a schedule that represented an early completion. So he did intend to complete the project early. And the contractor would also have to show that he had the capability to complete early. And then finally, the contractor will need to demonstrate that he could have completed early, but for these 60 days of delay. So those are challenging obstacles, and there's different ways those happen. Now, what happens now, and because of this particular scenario, what happens is, a lot of times an owner will say, okay, you can't show an early completion schedule. And so, or you have an early completion schedule and you say, okay, we're going to change the contract milestone. There are several different ways that owners try to deal with these early completion schedules. And there's not one solution that's going to fix a problem. If you say you can't show an early completion schedule to a contractor, a response from a contractor might be, well, what schedule do you want me to show you? Do you want me to show you how I plan to finish the job, or you want me just to make it fit the contract? In an ideal world, everyone would say, yes, let's finish early, show us how you're going to do it, and we'll all work together to get it done. But because of all these dispute resolution issues, there's always this contention. How do we manage that? If I'm a contractor and the contract says don't show an early completion, well, I'm just going to add a lot of fluff at the end of my schedule to push the completion date out. So if the owner delays me, I can ask for a time extension. So as an owner, you look at that fluff and you say, wait a minute, you got fluff at the end of your schedule. Well, then if you take that fluff out, you're back to an early completion schedule. So it's kind of one of those difficult things. The best, one of the best scenario is, in my opinion, is to let the contractor show the schedule that he intends to perform by, but then hold him accountable. I mean, week 1, week 2, week 3, starting at the very beginning of the job, start documenting, is the contractor meeting his schedule? If he's meeting his schedule and he's got an early completion date, there's a good chance that he might finish early. And you can, as an owner, everybody looks good if you finish early. So that's just one of the big issues. So once you make that determination in a dispute resolution scenario, where 30 days were before, 30 days were after the contract milestone. Now we've got to figure out how much that is. If the owner says, well, my value, or the contractor says my value was $5,000 a day for my overhead, so I've got $150,000 before in early completion, and then I've got $150,000 in delay claims after the contract completion. So you take those, break them up. Hey, how much will I be able to collect on the early completion dates? How much will I be able to? It's all part of determining how what the real value of your claim is. Then you want to look at your preparation cost. And both sides have to look at this. Sometimes you're in a dispute over a few $100,000 and you're looking at, wow, how much is it going to cost me to prosecute this claim or to defend against this claim? You've got legal fees in there, and you have consulting fees, and then there's also just the staff allocation. That's probably one of the biggest costs that my clients have that they don't even realize going into a claim scenario, is how much of my own internal staff is going to be involved in this. So another big factor in your risk assessment or risk analyzing the risk of this claim, resolving it, is managerial factors. How much is this going to impact the relationship with this other party, whether it's my client or a contractor or an owner? How much is this going to impact? Is this going to create a situation where I have a loss of goodwill, where maybe I can't get any more work from this owner, or maybe the owner is going to have such a negative impact towards my work that on the next job I get, they're going to, cut me, they're not going to be as generous in change orders or whatever. So you have to look at goodwill. And then loss of focus. An organization that gets involved in a major litigation issue will just inevitably will lose some of its focus because you're not focusing on what you do best in general. So those are big issues. So ultimately, after you analyze the risk of going to dispute resolution, it might look something like this. Your extra work might go from a $400,000, let's say this was $1 million claim, $400,000 was extra work, $300,000 in delay, loss of productivity was $300,000. By the time you analyze these, you can look at it and see that, wow, that my best case scenario, if I can get 75% of my extra work at $300,000, this delay because of the early completion and my ability to substantiate my delay, I might get 100,000 of that. My lost productivity, on a good day, I'll get 150, and then it's going to cost me 150,000 to prepare it. And then I look at the impact, loss of focus. It could cost me on other change orders on the job or other things where put a value at that. And next thing you know, your net claim is only it's gone from or a $1 million claim down to a $100,000 claim. So those are, and then you have to look at it from a managerial standpoint and say, is it worth going through all of this effort, reshifting the focus of my organization to potentially get $100,000? And so those kind of questions that's the first thing you should do. Even before you spend a lot of time doing delay analysis or whatever, you just look at some of the basic facts of your dispute and try to get a real determining factor on what the value on a good day is going to be, and then let's look at it and make that decision. Once you make that decision, then you're ready to move forward. I would like to do another poll right quick and just kind of get an idea or share so you guys can share among yourselves. How many of you have been in a claim over the last year? And we're taking that poll right quick. And I'm going to close that. And it's a pretty good group of you have actually been involved in some type of analysis or some type of dispute resolution that dealt with delay over the last year. About 65% of our audience has been in that situation. Well, the second step, if you are in a scenario and you've looked at it and you say, okay, we're going to move forward with this dispute resolution, we're either going to move forward and prosecute it or try to defend it, we will move forward. The next step is going to be to select the right analysis method. So I'm going to go over the 4 types of analysis. Now, if you look, there are some publications out there that they try to define. I know PMI has a definition in their PM BOK that tries to detail out all these different types of analysis. But in general, there's basically 4 types. And we're going to go through these right quick and just explain when you would use these different types of analysis. And the first type that we'll talk about is the total time analysis. The total time analysis is similar to a total cost claim type of thing. There's 3 factors. You have, here's my original duration, here's my actual duration right here, and then this is the difference. This is what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the difference between my original and my actual duration. Now, this, most of the time, people will not be able to just sit down and write a check on this type of claim. This type of analysis requires the most work as far as resolving it, because there's some big challenges to this type of analysis. Number one, you have to be able to show that there was no other way to quantify this delay. In other words, it was not something that we could just plug an activity into the schedule and see that schedule pushed out. In most cases, this type of analysis, it's a very valuable, in fact, probably it's a very valuable analysis. Out of all these analyses, this one's probably second in line as far as which the analysis that's used that I've seen in dispute resolution. This is usually the type of analysis that is performed for a total or for a disruption or loss of efficiency, loss of productivity type of claim. When there's so much going on, it's impossible to sit down and just plug in one delay activity and see it impact the schedule. So you have to be able to say that. This was not the type of delay that I could just plug into a critical path schedule and see the time impact analysis. There was no other way to quantify it. Now, here's the biggest challenge. If you're a contractor and you are submitting this type of claim, you're going to have to show that that original duration was reasonable. And inevitably, the response to that is, well, no, your original duration was too aggressive. You never could have met that. Or the same thing on a total cost. Your budgets were too aggressive. You never could have made that. You never could have made that schedule. The third thing that you have to be able to demonstrate is that the actual duration was reasonable. In other words, we were out here for this 100 extra days because of, and we weren't, off on other jobs because of these issues. We were actually working as hard as we could to try to complete it. So we have to show that that actual duration was reasonable. And finally, you have to be able to show that the difference in those 2 durations was not my fault. If you're the contractor, you're going to have to show, hey, I was not responsible for all these changes that impacted my productivity and my ultimate duration. Now, one of the things that you'll have to defend against, an owner is going to bring up, well, you were not, effectively managing the job. We have photos of people sleeping on the job, or we have photos of your equipment that was broken down, or you guys just didn't have the right management people. There's all different types of arguments that come out when you're trying to substantiate those. But if you're an owner, you want to get this resolved, these are the things that are going to have to be dealt with at the very beginning of a total cost claim. Just go ahead and realize that these questions are going to need to be answered. Let me show you the second kind of analysis. The other one is a very common analysis. This is the one in my work with attorneys that they like the most. This is the adjusted as planned schedule approach. In other words, you take a baseline schedule basically and plug a delay in there. It looks something like this. It's pretty simple. You have a baseline schedule. Here's a critical path. You plug a delay into that critical path, and it pushes the end date out. And you say, okay, we want this much extra time. The only problem, well, there's a benefit to this analysis, and then there is a negative aspect of this analysis. The benefit of this analysis is you have a critical path. Because you have a critical path, you can actually analyze it and say, here is the delay on the job, and it has impacted our critical path. The downside of it is, the negative side of it is, there's no as-built information. In other words, you're saying that this activity right here was critical, right? But actually, we happen to notice that you have a steel submittal that you didn't turn in on time, and in reality, that steel submittal was pushing this activity out, and it was pushing it out past when you're saying you would have started it in the first place. So, since there's no as-built information on this, it limits the ability to use this. Now, if you're at the beginning of the job, then this analysis is about all you have, because that's the only schedule is the baseline. And that's why it's so important to begin your updates as early as possible, so you're not forced to go back to a schedule that becomes out of date. That's basically this project, because it has no as-built, this schedule, because it has no as-built information, it doesn't stay accurate very long. So that's the upside and downside of that. The third type is the adjusted as-built approach. And this is the one I meant to say that the attorneys really like, because attorneys like facts. And so what you're doing when you're building an as-built, you're going through as-built records or whatever, and you're recreating the schedule based on as-built information, and then basically you identify delays in here. Here's a delay in this as-built schedule. You identify delays, you take those delays out, and you watch your job or your schedule collapse back. They call it collapsed as-built that far, but it's adjusted as-built schedule. And so it's one of those type of analysis that attorneys like. It's got a good plus side. It's got good as-built information. That's a good plus. But it's got a big negative too. There's no critical path. In other words, I can go back in an as-built situation, I can go back and basically put the logic that I think was the right logic. Or maybe one of these activities had maybe it had some float during the course of that project. And since there's no objective, the idea of a critical path or a schedule that has a critical path, you can look at it from an objective standpoint before the delay occurred, and you can see whether or not an issue was critical or not. And so let me give you an example of that. Here's a real simple example of a critical path. You have preparing the slab, and then you have an underground electrician, an underground plumber comes in, and then you're going to do the slab on grade. Now you can see in this example, there's been a delay with your underground electrical work, right? So we'll say this is 5 days, this is 5 days. That's a 5-day delay, right? And so your plumber only needed 3 days initially, but now he looks at it and says, wow, instead of having to be done by Friday, I've got all of next week. There's additional 5 days of delay. So he just begins to manage his float, saying, hey, maybe since you don't need me here, I'm going to run over to this other job and get some stuff done. And so his end dates keep sliding out a little bit. And then next thing you know, he doesn't show back up in time to finish it, and he ends up pushing that slab on grade out a day. And it's like, uh-oh, that's created a big problem. And so if you look at it from the objective critical path standpoint, you can see, well, that plumber for at least a few of those days was just managing his float, because he was managing because the electrical delay had represented that he had more time. And so, but in reality, he ended up delaying the job. If you look at it from an as-built standpoint, what ends up happening, if you look at it going back after the fact, it looks as if the plumber was the one who actually pushed that slab on grade out, and not the electrical, or not the electrical delay, because the electrical delay finished a day before the plumber. So those are the kind of issues that you have with an as-built schedule, and that's the weakness of it. The strength is it's got good actual data. The weakness is it doesn't have a critical path, but it does have its value. The other type of analysis is, the fourth type, is the contemporaneous time frame analysis. And this is the best type of analysis because it actually incorporates both the as-built, which you can see over here on the left, and up to a certain date during the course of the project. And then you have an objective critical path over here. Basically, the idea is that it is looking forward and it's objective. Prior to the delay, you have a critical path, and once you plug a delay into that critical path, now you can actually see this schedule is up to date, and prior to the delay, this was the critical path. And so that's a key factor in your ability to, or that's one of the best scenarios to look at the contemporaneous or look at a delay. It's the contemporaneous time frame. In other words, it's taking that's why it's so important to update your schedules as you go. If you're a contractor, or if you're an owner or a contractor, make sure that you start updating early, start building an accurate record of this is where we were at this time. This is the snapshots or the windows in time that we have to show how we analyze it. And once again, those are just the four basic categories. There's various modifications on those different types of categories. So you have to kind of select from those to say this is the best kind of analysis for our project or for this particular type of delay. I've got a question. Before I get into step 3, let me take a question here. I've got a question here from Bob. If I can get to my question panel. And I've got a question from Bob that says, from the standpoint of an early completion schedule, it's better to deal with delay claims if you accomplish a change order to shorten the project duration. It kind of calls the contractor's bluff if he refuses the change order. That can be the case, Bob. It can. You can really force the contractor to look at the schedule. If you say, I'm going to give you a change order, and we're going to change that end date to meet your early completion schedule, going back to the early completion schedule discussion. What you have to be careful of is that a contractor might just add duration to their schedule, once again, to meet that contract date so he doesn't get the change order, and then as an owner, you end up with a schedule that is not accurate. It's not really how the contractor plans to do the work. So once again, that's probably the best scenario that I've seen, is to just add a change order that says we're going to change the completion date. And the argument for that is, if our budget as the owner, our budget is 300 days. If you say you can finish it in 250, that means as an owner, I'm going to have to reallocate my budget and spread it over 250 days instead of 300 days. So if I do that and I've spent all my budget by day 250, then I'm going to have to spend extra money if you don't meet that 250 days. So it's very important. If you want to meet it in 250 days, it's very important you do it, and we're going to give you a change order to make sure you do that. Any other questions on, let's see if I have any other questions here. Okay, let's continue with our presentation. The last, the third step is actually putting your presentation together. And there are three things that you really want to do when you put your presentation together. You want to make sure that you're very thorough and very accurate. I've been involved in several disputes where organizations have put a delay analysis together and it just wasn't thorough. A lot of information was missing. A lot of information, in fact, was changed or fabricated to try to make something work. It's important to be thorough, accurate. This helps to bring credibility. If you have your own issues that you are responsible for as an organization, then you should include those in your analysis. Be very thorough. The second thing is keep it simple. I remember when I first started putting these analyses together, I used to try to write as much as I could and really impress everybody with my ability to look at delay analysis. But in reality, what I learned over the years, it's like reading a story to my kids. You know, and my kids, as long as they've got a good picture, they can understand what's going on in the story. And a lot of words doesn't mean a whole lot to my kids. So same thing with if you're going to be presenting to some type of dispute resolution panel, do your best to make your presentation as simple and as clear as possible. Particularly in the delay, you can have a lot of charts, you can have a lot of things to really make a good, clean presentation. Keep it simple because your panel is going to be reading volumes and volumes of material, looking through volumes and volumes of information. So if you add another volume, they're not going to have as much time to get to that. And so your best is to be very concise and very, very quick. And then the last thing is be flexible. And this is probably one of the key challenges. And in order to be flexible, you have to understand the areas where you can be flexible. For example, here are some categories of delay. Now, we went into these in detail in our previous webinar, which I think is available to you. If you request it, we can send you a link. We go into these in detail, but really looking at the delay analysis and determining not only critical and non-critical, but looking at it and say, okay, maybe this delay was excusable, just not compensable. Or maybe half of it was excusable and half of it was excusable and compensable. Or maybe a portion of it was concurrent and some of it wasn't concurrent. Concurrency is one of the biggest challenges in delay analysis, getting organizations to work through the concurrency issue. And the truth is, very few issues, very few delays are concurrent. If you look at the analysis that I showed you a while ago when we were talking about the as-built, how the plumber just let his work slip and slip and slip, right? Well, a lot of times someone would come back and say, oh, that's a concurrent delay. When in reality, it wasn't a concurrent delay. The plumber was managing their flow. Now, at some point, that delay became concurrent. And what that point was is something that you have to look at and analyze. That delay did become concurrent at some point, but for a big chunk of that plumber was just managing their float. And so being able to look at a delay and just instead of saying, oh, no, it was concurrent, or a portion of these delays were concurrent, so we're not going to give you anything. When in reality, the truth is, if a delay is concurrent, which means that both the contractor delayed and the owner delayed at the same time, if that's the case, then you should have an excusable, non-compensable delay. So you do need to give a time extension on a concurrent delay. It's just that since you delayed as the owner and the contractor delayed at the same time, the contractor can't charge for extended overhead. That means non-compensable. But at the same time, since you also contributed to the delay, a portion of the concurrency, you can't charge the contractor for liquidated damages, which means it's an excusable delay. So those are the ways, that's a scenario where that flexibility comes in to be able to look at the delay, and just instead of saying no, it's like saying, no, wait a minute, there was a delay, even though it's concurrent, we need to give a time extension, but just make sure it's excusable. We won't charge liquidated damages, but it's non-compensable. The owner can't charge, or the contractor can't charge us for extended overhead. So flexibility in those. And here are some other areas where flexibility is a big issue. On float ownership issues, an early completion schedule, looking at ways to define that. We just talked about that a little bit. But there's other kinds of float in individual activities, like we talked about with the plumber. An activity can slip without impacting the critical path. And both of those impact that concurrency issue. So flexibility is the third part. So prepare your presentation so that it is ready to convince. Make it thorough, keep it simple, and then have that flexibility. Address each issue individually, and then look for what the best resolution is going to be for those issues. Okay, let's take another question. I've got a question here from Charles. He said, we recently had a contractor that claimed delays and loss of productivity. Yet he finished the project on schedule he submitted at the beginning of the job. His expert used the measured mile analysis to show his loss of productivity. Is this a valid means to show loss of productivity? Yes, Charles, that's probably one of the best ways to do that. When you have lost productivity, the measured mile, just for those of you that don't know, measured mile looks like this. The concept came from, let's take a highway project, for example. I'm not sure what kind of project your project was, Charles, but let's use this as an example. In a roadway construction, you're going to bring your excavation crews. They're going to be coming down, getting your grade, and then right behind that, your finishing crews come behind. They're getting compaction. Then you're doing your base course, and then you're doing your paving. So you have a flow of your crews that you plan. This is a simple example, and you're moving down through here. And as a result of that, let's just take your excavate and grade. You're getting, let's say, 200 units or 2,000 units or 200 units per hour, something like that, 2,000 units per day or whatever it might be, right? But you get over here to the second part of the job and you start hitting some soft spots, or you can't get your compaction, you've got unsuitable materials, or you run into some differing site conditions down in here, and you run into some design issues over here on this side of the road. So what ends up happening, instead of being able to flow through this project in a steady linear pace, you keep having to come back and rework this area, and then you jump back up here and try to continue, then you come back and work this area, and it ends up just being you can't get any of your productivity, and so now you're down to getting 100 units per hour, or 100 units, 100 units per hour, just for consistency. So now you can look at that and say, down here at the beginning of that first mile, we were getting 200 units, right? And the reason the measured mile is so important, if I have a project and I say, well, we always get, I only got 100 units of productivity per hour on this, or 1,000 units a day. I only got that much productivity on this job. And we always get, 200 units per hour. Well, as an owner, I'm going to come back to the contractor and say, well, you don't always have this management crew, and you don't always have this crappy equipment you had that was breaking down every day out on our job, right? Well, the measured mile analysis looks at it from a specific job. This is the same job, same crew, same management, same equipment. We could get 200 units per hour, and you cost us 100 units, and it cost us, basically, our productivity went in half. In other words, it cost us twice as much. Now, remember a while ago, we talked about the total time, right? So when you have the total time claim, when in this period is the delay, and you really can't just plug an activity in to show a delay. It's difficult. These issues up here at the top, all these different issues that came in, they're not specific enough where you can just plug them into a critical path schedule and see the impact to the completion. So measured mile is one of the best productivity analysis that you have. Now that, once again, that's a little, Charles, in your question, that's a little different from the early completion portion of it. The early completion is kind of another, that's kind of dealt with in a different way. And those questions, if you request the handout from this, I've got those issues detailed on that early completion slide that shows, to get an early completion schedule, the contractor shows they need to be able to demonstrate that they intended to complete early first, they could have completed early. In other words, we were getting our production, but because of this delay, the third reason is, or the third justification, you have to be able to show that we could not finish because of this delay. Okay? If you have any more questions on that, feel free to just contact us and let us know. Here's another question from James. How rigorous should the schedule specification requirements be in public works contract? We find many contractors don't have expertise in critical path schedule. Well, that's probably one of the best questions you can ask, because it's one of those sad things. I've worked on projects, James, where I've had to deal with 60 pages. I remember one project a few years back, 60 pages of scheduling specifications in the contract. And it detailed everything from the size of activities, how they get broken out, what kind of resources put in there, how the resources get broken out, how the cost is broken out, how they're going to be updated, just spelled it all out. The problem is with scheduling and with critical path schedule, it's just impossible to enforce quality. With a lot of the work that goes on in the field, you can go out and inspect it and say, we need you to replace this. It didn't work because there's a very clearly delineated quality measurement. With a schedule, it's really difficult. You can have the right activities, you can have the resources in there, you can have all this data in there, but if it's not really a good plan, or if the contractor hasn't really used it to really plan their work, it's just difficult to enforce that. There is a webinar that we did a few months back, 2 or 3 months back, where it's called Managing a Contractor Schedule, and I'm sure we'll be having that again coming up soon. But in that, I give you some pointers to help deal with that. And one of the best ways you can do that, James, is at the very beginning of the job, when you say, and this, you can put this in the specs, when you start preparing, from the notice to proceed or from the notice of award, and we have our pre-construction conference, every week we're going to have a scheduling meeting, and we're going to sit in and see how you're doing on your schedule. If you have 3, 6, 9 weeks in your contract for the contractor to prepare their schedule, you can say each one of those weeks we're going to meet, we'll bring a projector, we're going to put that schedule up on the board, and let's just talk about the schedule. And you'll begin to see right away how that contractor's doing, and you can actually get involved and put your input in the schedule before it's ever submitted. That does a couple things. It really helps. You can provide some input, and you can help see where the schedule's at before it's submitted. It helps the review process, all that kind of stuff. And that's probably one of the best things I know to really help get that quality that you can't enforce in the scheduling specifications. Okay? I believe that's about all the time we have for today. If there's any comments, please let us know. Thank you.
Okay, once again, thank you for attending. We would appreciate your participation in a survey immediately at the close of this webinar. If you're in a group, please take your time and get input from the group for the survey. We do want to know how we're doing. In the survey, you can also request verification for continuing education. Thanks again. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Angel.
Thank you, our attendees. Please fill out our survey and have a good day.
Thank you.